What's up, mediums? Welcome to the Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is Kayleen the Glamazon Williams. We're two authors on a journey to learn more with you, the audience, so thank you for joining us. This episode of the Writer's Journey is brought to you by The Writing Dream, a new book for authors written by Josh P., Scott Moon, and me. Check it out right now on Amazon. Our guest, yes, please do. Our guest is a history professor, MFA creative writing instructor, and a science fiction and fantasy author based in Nashville, Tennessee. Between his 31 titles, he's got something to thrill, entertain, and make you cringe in horror, guaranteed. And tonight, the professor's holding office hours. Terry Maggert, welcome to the show.
Hello, friend. Hi. Hello. I'm very happy to be here.
It is so good to see you again.
Yeah.
We had such a blast with this dude face over here in the 20 books. He's good people. Everyone should look him up. Friendly internet stalk him because he's great.
I had a really good time. That was an excellent. I can't wait for next year already.
Right?
It was excellent.
Right.
We're gonna like super rally and like really take it just like all the way.
Oh yes. Yes.
Everyone sign up for the 20 books mailing list so you can be first to get a ticket because they go fast.
Yes, they do.
And I might add that as somebody that's a veteran of going to like conventions and writing seminars and stuff, it was one of the rare opportunities I ever saw where it's so much actionable intel. Everything there was used. Everything, like every single thing that was happening was something you need to be a successful author in terms of the viability of the information, the timeliness of it, the freshness of it. A lot of really good stuff.
Now, as a veteran author and an instructor, you go to a lot of different writing conferences. What draws you to writing conferences, just while we're on this topic?
Well, I think we should probably, we're all writers. We share some of the same DNA in that when we first start out, we're very thirsty. I think that's one of the reasons why the writing industry can be so predatory. That's a negative aspect of it. But so I always say, caveat emptor, be careful where you're spending your money for conferences because you like 20 books, obviously, that was the gold standard for learning things to advance your career. Like every single block of time there was dedicated to something useful. Now, sometimes some people like to go to cheerleading sessions, and those are great too for people. I'm not particularly built that way. I'm self-motivated, but some people, the camaraderie is a really critical part of how they succeed. And so I always say, let's talk to other writers, find out what they think about the conference. Let's use 3 dirty letters, ROI, return on investment.
Right.
We don't like to talk about that as authors or creatives, but once you find something that clicks with you and people who think like you do, I think that becomes a target that you should attend.
Yeah. So with writers' conferences, you talk about ROI, you're talking about plane tickets,
Sure.
You're talking about time, you're talking about all that travel.
Oh, yes.
What are you getting back in return for that?
Yeah.
You just went to one last weekend down south.
Yeah. I'm at a really good, I'm very fortunate. I know that I'm at a really wonderful place where I get to go to events that are maybe a little more established. I've been to a few events now. Like this year, I'll go to Once Upon a Book up in Frankenmuth, Michigan. I can't even rave enough about that event because of Stacy Rourke and who they are and Frankenmuth and the overall experience. And then the North Iowa Book Bash. I know you don't necessarily think North Iowa and literature, and yet it's a great event run by really good people. So you sort of hone your radar in terms of what you're looking for as an author. And I don't know. We had a little chance to talk out in Vegas to talk shop, but this is year 6 for me. So at this point, I've sort of taken the training wheels off, and at a certain point in your career, you're going to have to learn how to say no, and you're going to have to learn how to say yes to the right events.
That's really good advice because I do see a lot of people, they get all the things. They want to do all the things, get all the tools, go to all the places. And even that can burn you out, because it's a lot of investment on, not only your pocketbook, but your time, that had you chosen 2 out of the 5, you could have been using to write all the words.
Yes.
So.
And
yeah, I agree.
You just said out of your pocketbook. You're like, I write well on the road, but not everybody does. So actually, I mean, I think if you have kids and pets and you look at a clean hotel room with crisp sheets and everything, and you say, that's an opportunity to write for a lot of us. But for some of us, to get on a plane and fly or to drive or anything like that, you have to be very careful with it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't great things. Like, I'm a huge proponent of libraries, and libraries are constantly having little events right by you, right under your nose, and they're almost always free.
So. That's true, and they love local authors. Like, they want to meet local authors. They want to give them a platform. At restaurants, radio stations, everywhere local, they would love to meet the local author and to give them a chance to share their hometown pride. So you've been writing for 6 years now. You have 31 books written and published. What got you into writing and then teaching writing?
I think, like everybody, I hesitate to make sweeping statements about writers because we're different people, but I think we're all readers. And I was just a compulsive reader. I'm a compulsive reader who aged and aged, wrote some truly terrible poetry as a youth. Oh yes. Nobody understands me. That you write those things and there's cringe, and then there's what I wrote when I was younger. But I wrote some short stories, and I didn't really get serious until I was well into my 40s. But I think that I'm actually a good example of, I encourage people, I call it the 40s bloom, sort of like, we're out on the road on the grind together, and you meet a lot of people my age who have just we didn't just grow out of a petri dish. We matured, filled up with stories, and sort of took it upon ourselves to say, I'd like to tell a story. And that's how it started. I wrote a short horror piece, like 1,800 words. It was too short, but it was an idea. I sent it to an editor. It was rejected. And I ended up writing my first book, which was 77,000 words. At night, I took the night shift with our son. I typed with one hand while watching the same 5 videos on VH1 over and over again. And that's kind of how it went. And that's just that's the catalytic moment that led to all this.
So you had like a baby in one hand, and then you just plunking out.
Well, I use the term baby very loosely because my son is 11 years old and he's 5'7". So he's just, it's like a Viking that eats in my house. So, but yeah, he was a toddler, but I would take night shift because I don't really sleep that much. So.
Oh, wow. That is cool. And that's kind of inspiring. For those of us who are single writers, sometimes life gets in the way, but then I think, man, if Terry can do that with a kid and then he's doing it at night, he can do that, then I can do this too.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to tell you something that I'm just going to say a professor thing. I tell anybody who wants to be a writer, writing is a relationship. First of all, writing is work. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Writing is work. But secondly, it's about prioritizing. And I want you, like, imagine Lauren is my friend. I will make time to message Lauren because I prioritize, your last name is Weems, I believe. Is it Weems?
Williams. Me? I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing there with the Weemage.
But I would make time to message you out in Idaho.
Could be a Weem. I don't know.
This is a Weems. But I would make time, it's about prioritizing. So if you consider it a relationship, like a relationship with my friends, the people who are important to me, I make time for them, and writing is no different. It's just that writing tends to give you money instead of borrowing money from you, like some of our friends do. So there's a distinction there. But I prioritize, and you can have a word count every day if you wish. Like Pacemaker Press is a wonderful app that sort of, I call it my shame-spiration. If I don't write, Pacemaker Press sends me a little message that says you didn't write today, and then I feel mild shame. And it's a great tool.
Shame.
Exactly. Shame. Yeah. But you prioritize and you get your word count. And also, this is a self-actualizing prophecy that I create books, and my books built my career, which in turn makes me want to write more books.
Yeah, I heard Joanna Penn say something similar, that you just name it and claim it. You know, if you are an author, even if you haven't published yet, name it and claim it.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, we'll always have more titles than we'll have time to write. I have a green notebook full. I could live to be 150 and I'd never be able to write all the books that I have ideas for. So
yeah.
And that's the truth of it. You know, don't spend 10 years on a single, write the manuscript, get it edited by whatever means you have, publish it, write the next one. There's a finite amount of years that we all have. And I know I'm going to awkwardly segue.
Please.
Everyone is just dying to know what you have to say about tension. And I'm sure the tension out there,
okay.
When are we going to get the tension? I'm so full of tension.
Maybe come on. When are they going to talk about tension? Please tell me.
Maybe we've been.
So there's tension about tension?
Yeah, we've been showing tension through not talking about tension.
Sure. Well, we let it build, and now we will release the tension.
What do we mean by that, and why is that important?
Tension makes you care. Without tension, you don't care. And I'll give you a great example of writing without tension. Reader's Digest.
Ooh.
You read Reader's Digest and it'll say, the nicest person I ever met. And you read and it tells a story about an old man who gave you an ice cream cone in 1977. And you're like, you read it and you put it down and you go, that was rather nice. And that's it. It's over. There's no tension in it. You don't know that at the last page, the gentleman doesn't pull out a crossbow and shoot you or anything like that. There's no plot twist. There's nothing happening. There's no tension. Tension invests the reader in the story. And I might add that tension invests the reader from page to page, chapter to chapter, and in an arc that spans the entire narrative. They're all distinct kinds of tension that have a different flavor, but they all serve the same purpose, and that is to create interest.
So what are some different ways that an author can do that?
Let's begin. There are three elements. I want to, and again, I've made so many mistakes writing that I am comfortable talking about my own mistakes. Flavors of tension can happen with different vectors, and consider tension between characters. If you get two characters who are identical, you're not going to have any tension. But you can have tension between characters that creates a lot of interest throughout the entire story, and that's why we have an antagonist and a protagonist and secondary characters. You can have the environment as tension. I'm going to give you a great example. Jack London wrote tension very well, and if you read To Build a Fire, it's superb. It's superb. And all it is about one man trying to defeat the elements, and he loses. So the environment can be tension. And then the other thing is what I call problems with a capital P. Problems create tension. And they are a wonderful way for you to introduce a complication at the 25% mark, or maybe the 50% mark, and generally always at the 75 to 80% mark. That's where you're going to want your biggest problems to occur.
That's actually really good notage. I know a lot of that falls like beat sheets we had talked about earlier last year is all about the percentages of when within page ranges based on how long you want it to be that certain things should be happening. So if there's anyone out there,
the Disney effect. 22 minutes into every single Disney film, what happens? A parent dies.
Oh,
that's true.
Simba! There you go,
right.
22 minutes. Mark it just like that.
Wow. I heard there's teaching advice about how long you can talk and to keep someone's attention, and it's like first page divided into two, and then the maximum is 20 minutes. You can't go over 20 minutes.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. When I was a history professor, I would have a 55-minute class. I would have 3 blocks of time, maximum 3 blocks of time, where I would talk about, 3 separate topics within a larger topic. But yeah, and also the other thing is I remember what it was like to be a kid and have somebody say, and now we're going to discuss Jupiter, and, go on for, and you'd say, so we do have a finite attention span. That plays into it certainly. And by all means, write your own book. I don't want you to be fully engaged with your lizard brain and believe that you have to follow a model or save the cat or the story wheel or anything like that. But largely, you do want to invest the reader and then move on past a certain point, because otherwise they're going to get a little roamy.
So what are some ways you can invest the reader right off the bat?
Something I believe, if you don't have a great first sentence, you don't have a book. You have to have a fantastic.
The last thing I agonize over is that opening sentence.
You bet. Your first sentence is as important as the hook. And this is writer talk, it's as important as the hook, or as important as your tagline, I believe. Your tagline tells you a lot more about the book than your first sentence does, but the first sentence should tell you, it should be like peeking around a corner to understand a little more of what's going on than just the words. I'll give you an example. I've got a series that's, and I'm not shilling books, it's just that I've memorized most of my own work. But I've got a dark urban fantasy series that involves a succubus. And the first sentence is, she said hello in a voice that was devoid of music. And immediately, as soon as I'm introducing her as being predatory. And so I'm going to introduce her as being stripped away of human emotion. And I had to do it very quickly. I had to introduce things like physical qualities. Her eyes were brittle and hooded. You've only got 1, 2, 3, and I use short staccato sentences to invest people quickly. I feel it has a cinematic touch to it. And that's another thing that I stress, sentence variation. That's how you create tension. If you write similar sentences, what happens? It's like the lines on a highway. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum.
It all starts sounding the same.
Absolutely. Lulls you to sleep.
Now, we've talked in the past about purple prose.
Oh.
Oh, the prose.
Oh, boy.
This. I think you're taking risks in your prose, and some of us need to take more risks. We might be too worried about purple prose, and we strip all the poetry out of our writing. Sure. And then the writing becomes more repetitive, dull. So how do you balance that out? Like, not going too far into your poetry in your prose that it gets purple, but also not being too repetitive and dry. Like, how do you know when to add in a detail and when to leave it out?
Use it as a sucker punch. That's what I call a sucker punch. You can have, like, I will channel Hemingway for 5 sentences, and then Terry shows up, and then I'll have a 31 or 38 word sentence, and then I use, and the other way that you use this to create tension is you have your sentence structure, and I can't overstate the importance of this. And I'm telling everybody that's here, first of all, I'm thankful you're here, and if you take nothing else away from this, think of your work in 3 dimensions. You're thinking of it as the words that you write. You're thinking of it, it's critical to think of it in spacing. Like, what's it look like on the Kindle or on the page? Spacing is absolutely critical. That's why I always finish, you want to build tension. I'll give you a great example. Neil Gaiman used, so she showed 4 words, just 4 words, there we go, to create unbelievable tension and a satisfying conclusion simultaneously in American Gods. There's a scene where the wife breaks the neck of this guy in a car, and he says, so tell me, how'd you kill all those people? And the last sentence is, so she showed him. And that is the perfect example of a buildup of tension and a release of tension, and at the same time dragging you, kicking and screaming into the next section because you want to know, okay.
Well, show him.
Yeah, she's 100 pounds, 5 foot nothing. She snaps this guy's neck, and I need to know what happens next. once again, that sentence was by itself on the page. So when you look at that page, it's an island. It's a short, violent, punchy island, and it's so gorgeously spaced in both the print and Kindle version that I stress. Think of your writing, not just how it sounds, not just how you feel about it, but how does it look written? Because the writer is going to see it that way, or the reader, excuse me, is going to see it that way.
So when I look at a chapter, I'm thinking about what's the main conflict here and how can I have the reader start anticipating the conflict coming?
Yes.
And then build it up into a climax. And then at the end, I want to satisfy those expectations that have kind of built it up.
Absolutely. And you can give breadcrumbs too as you go.
What do you mean by that?
You can have little resolutions to satisfy the reader. I mean, I don't want to read 850 pages and wait until 3 pages from the end and then, oh, they made it. I want some conflict resolution throughout it to satisfy the itch that I have as I invest myself in the story. And it also, one of the other things that does is it continues to raise the stakes. As you get resolution, you're building value in those characters and adding richness to the texture of the story, and you get more and more invested. So you're even angrier if something bad happens in the end, or if it's a satisfying resolution, you're even more happy with it.
Do you have any examples from your books where you're able to kind of do that?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're writing, and this is something for anybody who considers writing in series. I've written both standalones and I've written in a series. I have a YA dystopian. It's The Sixth Sense meets Dystopian Angels is what it is. It's my own thing. I wrote it purely for pleasure and it ended up kind of selling. And I thought, okay, but I started off with a very simple, I asked a question about the character. And then I said, I'm going to take 3 books to answer this question. And in the midst of these, 270,000 words, I will answer several smaller questions that go on. I don't want to give it away, but I love, I'm obviously a historian. I love using sort of salting in little hints about it and giving the payoff to the reader. So it gives them a payoff using history where they're like, oh, it was there all along in front of me. And I think that's one of the ways that you can both maintain tension and release tension to keep interest high.
Well, with history, when your novel is set in history, your audience might know parts of the plot that the characters themselves don't know. So you can build up irony there. You can build up dramatic irony in that your reader might have more information that the characters don't, and you can kind of play with that.
Yeah, you can, and I'll go one step further than that. As nerdy as you want to get, and I'll just go ahead and spoil it. So there's a character whose name is Arad, and Arad is actually, it's not a historical name, but it's an old name. And for someone who wanted to research it, they might. But anyway, Arad is involved in this entire novel. And sort of at the end of the novel, the main character, Livy, her voice cracks with authority. And she says, Arad, what's the name of this place? And he looks around and he's not used to be spoken to that way like a female because it's in the distant past. And he says, I'm sorry. And she says, the name of this place. What is it? And he says, oh, that hill, we call it Babel. It's the Tower of Babel. And I dropped it in, and there's 62 Easter eggs throughout it to lead you to this conclusion. But now that's a payoff for specifically, that's a gift to the readers. But it took 62 Easter eggs of tension to get them there. And depending on how curious you are, you might have found it, or if you go along. So
I love it when writers do that. It's like you know that there's something like in there, and you're just like,
yes.
I almost put my finger on it. And you keep reading, and there's all this other stuff going on that's important, but there's this thing itching at the back of your head, and sometimes you don't even catch it. Right. And you read it a second time, you're like, oh, that was the thing. I need to go back and read because that was the thing. That was when it happened. And then you have to re-find it. It's glorious. I love
there's a character whose name is Teresa Hanitis, and she's a vicious librarian. And when you finally get up to her door, it says T Hanitis Thanatos. She's death incarnate. But and it took, halfway through the book before you realize something's not right with her. I mean, granted, she contoured her makeup and wore sensible shoes, but there's other things wrong with this person. And so she
love the description. She's a vicious librarian. So,
yes.
Right.
Yes. She was I love librarians, so it was anathema to me to write a mean librarian who was genuinely angry. So, but tension, it depends also, it's genre specific. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about sexual tension, are we talking about insta love? I mean, romance landia is its own thing entirely. Science fiction and fantasy is its own thing. Horror, and I've written my share of horror, is another thing too. So I think that you should certainly tailor your methodology to the genre that you feel most comfortable writing in.
I was wondering, like, as a horror writer, have you learned more about tension specifically from writing in that genre? And then have you used any of those lessons in other genres?
Absolutely. And I'll go one step further. I'll say that I'm 51 years old and I cut my teeth on psychological horror in the 70s. And there's a huge difference between Jason Voorhees and anything that was done prior to 1979 in terms of the way that you ratchet the tension and the investment of, what's around the corner? Why is it dark in this house? All of these keying into primal fears, that really ratchets up tension, as opposed to, look, if I see a guy who's 6'5" in a hockey mask with a butcher knife, I intuitively know that this is a bad situation. I don't have to say, what's going on here? So there's different. What?
It's awfully warm out here tonight for that mask.
Yeah. You like hockey too? So yeah. So yes, horror also taught me that the definition of true evil is very casual. Like, evil to me, it's one thing if you see Jason Voorhees and I'm just using him as an example. You look at the guy from Friday the 13th and you do not get a good vibe. But if you look at a little old lady and she's like, hello, sweetheart, how are you? And she turns out to be a cannibal. Okay, that that unexpected casual nature of that violence. And if she acts out with no warning, to me, that's a lot more terrifying than somebody in a hockey mask.
Oh man, that reminds me, my daughter is getting into ghost and creepy stories, which is, I find totally weird because she's terrified of zombies, right? But she's doing these like spooky stories. And she was reading me this one. It's just like this, they're about 3-4 pages long each. And this little girl is on the sidewalk and she's drawing this dragon and her brother comes up and it's like the most glorious dragon in the entire world. And he's like, how long have you been drawing this? And da-da-da-da. She's like, just a few minutes. He's like, no, you're not. You're lying. Anyway, she's like, yeah, do the chalks in the little box. This old lady came by and gave it to me. And she said I could draw anything that I wanted. And he's just like, oh, I totally don't believe this. And he looks in the box of chalk and he's like, they look kind of familiar. They look like bones. And then he really took a look at what his sister was drawing with. And they were the bones of fingers.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just like, oh.
I love that. I sold a horror story about a little girl that had a tea set, a haunted tea set that when adults weren't around, it filled up with blood and she would drink out of it. And then they never knew. And I made the villain like there's a stepdad and his name's Brad and he vapes and he's into CrossFit and everything. And so, Brad's going to die anyway, but it's a common trope to have children turn out bad, especially like if you've seen Pet Sematary or read Pet Sematary. That's a very shocking trope. And so I use that, but I use something familiar and calming and wonderful, which is a child's tea set, which I find very jarring. I love the trope of writing. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. There was this other one with the snowman. She was mad at her brother for whatever reason, and tricked the snowman into eating her brother. Another one. This kid, this toothpaste. Sorry, I'm totally going off. But these things, I was just like, you're reading these, okay? He brushed his teeth so much. This was like magic toothpaste that he was like brushing off like the whole side of his face.
Oh wow.
Oh my God. Anyway, so back onto topic.
Okay, so
a Facebook viewer say horror is often rooted in finding the unexpected and perceived safety or innocence.
That says it much better than I did.
One of the things I'm hearing here is that you can be setting up the reader for a certain kind of emotion. Maybe it's like, trouble is coming, a dark setting. I hear a crack in the distance. I hear something creak or whatever. But then changing up that emotion with something funny can kind of burst that bubble and can affect the reader. Like here, this is kind of the opposite. You've got perceived safety or innocence, and then you turn it on its head. So like playing with emotions, creating a certain emotion in the scene, and then bursting it in a certain way can have an effect.
And burst it twice. Don't just burst it once. Use it as the step down effect. Like you'll say, like, hey, Lauren, I think I heard something over there. And we walk over and there's a possum walking away. We all love possums. And then a zombie comes out and bites my toes off. In other words, there are two separate events in that where you think you've de-escalated the tension, but you haven't. Yeah. It's a false conclusion. And that's actually particularly good if you're going to use it at the end of a chapter. That's a really great closing. I call that the velvet hammer. At the end of a chapter, you want to have the velvet hammer. You want to have something that is emotionally jarring or satisfying and has a lot of punch, but doesn't damage the reader so much that they won't go on past to the next chapter.
Can you give us an example?
Gentle slap in the face.
Yeah, exactly. All of my chapters end that way. I intuitively tend to write, I think, in very clearly defined spaces between 70 and 90,000 words. That's just how my mind works. I think in fully formed books. I don't necessarily think, and I tend to think very cinematically. A lot of people, we're all very different writers. I choose to close each chapter with some sort of emotional investment that does that stair step for the tension, because I don't want to release it all. It's not a balloon. You don't do that until the denouement at the end. Or I'm a big fan of two epilogues, for that matter. I like there to be a conclusion, and I like there to be a hopeful conclusion, because your epilogue doesn't necessarily have to be upbeat. So
everybody can.
What's the difference between the resolution and the denouement? Because they can happen in the same chapter, but they're not necessarily the same thing.
Absolutely. Resolution is an event. A resolution is a click. A resolution is the parts of a tumbler coming together. It's almost mechanical. And it's reverse engineered. If you look back, like The Sixth Sense, the movie, you can look back and see all the pieces. That's like that book I wrote, Heartborn. You can look back through it and go, oh my goodness, it was all there right in front of me. And then click, 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 everything clicks together. But the denouement is what I call lifetime television for readers. It's a little bit softer and fuzzier. It has warmer edges to it. It is something that gives you hope about the end. I wrote a post-apoc novel, and at the end, after these horrific events, at the end there is a group of evil pigs that they're sort of pigs that secrete acid, and they grab this guy, and he thinks he's going to get away, and the villain comes out and goes, "Here, piggy, here," and that's the end of the book. And then it goes to the denouement, and the denouement is where the two main characters, who have gradually been gravitating closer to each other, they stand on the hillside, and he reaches out and puts his hand on her stomach, and he says, "And then I felt the kick."
Oh.
And it ends like that. So you're investing them, continuing to invest them beyond it, because it's going to be a really good story, but you don't want to end on something that's entirely bleak necessarily, because tension. I mean, if you're writing grimdark, great, that fits. But if you're not, I don't necessarily want to leave them where they close the book and they say, "Well, I'm glad that's over."
Yeah. That's true. You want to lose sleep at night because maybe just one more chapter. I can't leave it here. I mean, it's just you, and then you leap ahead. It's only 6 pages. I can do that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Where we start doing that math in our head, we're like, okay, my alarm goes off at 5:25.
Yep.
3 hours and 18 minutes. That's enough sleep.
It's only 12:20. If I read a little bit faster, I could probably finish by, and then, definitely get a solid yes.
Yeah.
Write those things.
All right, we've got a really great comment in the chat, which we'll pick up in a moment. But first, let's do a show sponsor.
A little bit of a show sponsor, because tonight is brought to you by The Writing Dream by Lauren Moore, Josh Hayes, and Scott Moon, our very own Keystroke team. Woo, 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 woo. They're amazing people. Here we go. Let's take the ride. Writing. Something you've always dreamed of doing, but there's just not enough time. Or maybe you've already written a book, or 6, but they aren't doing well. With nearly 50 million books on Amazon today, what can you do to make your book stand out? From the popular podcasts Keystroke Medium Live, Josh Hayes, Scott Moon, and Lauren Moore pan the gold from hundreds of author interviews, anecdotes, tips, and advice from authors across the publishing spectrum and all over the globe. We've chosen the very best of it, time-tested and proven successful, backed up by our personal experience. Whether you can't find the time to write, or you don't have a clue how to market, or you just need to fine-tune your process, there's something for you in this book. Click buy now. Amplify your dream.
Of doom.
Of doom. All the good doom.
Ellen Campbell wrote that blurb. I thought it was amazing. That's everything.
That's fantastic.
That's good copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good copy. You can feel it when you write good copy. Like it's like I'll like when I wrote "Come for the waffles, stay for the magic." And then I just went like this. I just threw my glasses down and walked away, threw my arms up and walked away. I said, "I'm done here."
Winning!
Yeah. I know. And a lot of times when I'm reading these ad reads, I end up reading them cold, so it's like, it's the first time I'm reading it. So if I can, and I've never read that before, not going to lie. That's the first time I read it. And I only stumbled right in the beginning because I'm usually nervous then. And it just rolled right off the tongue, it naturally flowed. So good copy. Readers, they're going to be reading it cold. So if you're stumbling over bits, if you get people who get hung up on bits when they read it, that might be a part you need to look at. Anyway, sideline note. Comment.
All right. Kronos earlier, he said, I like tension where the protagonist's worst enemy is his own mind. Like Tyler Durden, narrator. Fight Club. Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. Mark Spector. Moon Knight, and Marvel.
Yeah.
So what do you think? How can we do that? Build tension where the protagonist's worst enemy is himself. He is his own antagonist.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yes, I'm a fan of that. I like. I mean, if you're writing a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu, that's extremely tedious and not very interesting to me. I believe that it's extremely human to make mistakes. So your characters should make miscalculations. That doesn't mean that they're incompetent, but if you're going to give them a deep-seated flaw like Tyler Durden, or actually Bateman is even better. I mean, he's great. I mean, that's a terrific example of somebody whose internal conflict is far worse than the external conflict. So that's almost an extremely interior novel. I like that.
So if your reader is following along with that, they're going to be like wanting to shout at that character, like, come on, you can't do that, or no, this is a mistake.
Yeah.
But you can take that too far and it can get annoying too. Like how many times you watch a movie and you'd be like, they're splitting up in this house again?
Seriously, how many times do people have to die before you realize to stay together?
Yeah.
Exactly. How do you get the reader to that place where they're in a good way, kind of anticipating what's coming next? That tension's building because they're concerned about the main character's choices and their thinking, but they're not going. You're not pushing them too much and making them annoyed. How do you strike that balance?
It is a balance. Well, it's a balance predicated on the idea of how much capability are you going to imbue your character with at the beginning. And that directly relates to how much tension you can create in the novel. Look, how much tension is there in a Superman story? you have to really work hard to make Superman weak. So, and you're setting the table early on with tension, because that's it ties back to the flaws that the character has. The other thing is, I write books that I would like to read. So I have a very low threshold for frustration past a certain point. Like if it's past 30% and the character is still doing things like, that's a strange noise out there in the chainsaw shed. Why don't we go and I'm like, somebody take his head off, past that. Yeah, please. Now, if it stays with the true to the spirit of the character, that can work, but also that's a one-note character. It's a one-trick pony. It's not going to be interesting. If there's no growth in your character or change in your character, it's very difficult to build tension around it, because the tension all has to be, it's like hitting a middle C on a piano over and over again. Ding, ding, ding. You're not going to vary throughout 80,000 words, and it's going to get boring.
And if you're writing a book like for a year long, you're taking a year or 2 years to write it, like, I've done that, you might end up doing that very thing accidentally, where you're writing the same kinds of scenes again and again and again. You don't even realize it just because it's taking you so long to write this book.
Yeah, well, that's where other eyeballs are our friends. Beta readers are your friends. So yes, but if your character changes, then the way that they react and the world around them is going to change as well. Like I can get, like, the person I am at this age is not the person I am when I was 20. Like I used to almost have a stroke every time I got in traffic in my car, and now I don't. And so that right there, I could write a story around that. You age out of certain things, you become more capable, you become less capable in certain ways, and that works when you're because tension is based on challenges. Tension is not necessarily based on solutions. So your payoff is the solution. That's where they made it. Okay. But tension continues to grow. Go ahead.
The satisfying bit for the reader is really how they get to that solution. The choices the characters make, right or wrong. If it goes wrong horribly, how are they fixing it? And how do they learn from it and not do the same mistake again?
Yes, and it's very difficult. You can write a character. I'll give you a great example. Clive Cussler's main character, Dirk Pitt. He's been writing Dirk Pitt for 35 years. Well, actually, 38 years now. Dirk Pitt doesn't make many mistakes, but he's still interesting because things go wrong in his world. Like he has mechanical failures in aircraft or things like that. So that's where remember earlier I mentioned the environment is your challenge. Dirk Pitt is incredibly competent, but the environment is still his enemy. So he's capable. And the other thing is he never has the same bad guy twice. Like your villains, there's a constant influx of interesting villains and challenges. But this is, gamer culture really gets it right in terms of having an overpowered character. Overpowered characters are terrible for tension.
Yep.
They're the enemy of tension.
Where is the next question coming from? I don't know. Sorry, I'm so intently listening to this, I'm forgetting to actually be a host and come up with questions. Bad host, Kayleen.
My brain did the thing that your brain did. I had a question like a minute ago, and then I was thinking about.
Oh, she had a Kayleen brain fart. Oh no,
I forgot it.
It happens. I will be in mid-sentence, and then I can just see it just disappearing, into the ether.
I remember what it was. Okay, so all of this sounds like it would need a whole lot of planning. Are you coming up with your plots spontaneously? Are you letting them grow? Are you exploring your plots, or are you thinking them up ahead of time before you start writing? What's your process?
I write in two different ways. For my military sci-fi and my sci-fi, I like to use outline because it's a complicated universe. There's a lot going on. And for the Halfway Witchy series, which is, a young witch in a small town with a judgy cat, works at a diner. It's a very finite set of data for her. And I think in her voice, I know how she's going to react to things. I know that her boyfriend is, he reacts he is a man out of time in the sense that the world is very unusual. He's a 1,000-year-old Viking. So the entire world is mysterious and challenging and hilarious to him. And so I have that set of data, and I can sit down and start writing a Carly story and not have to do anything else except write it. Now with my military sci-fi and stuff like that, and for other writers, I have to keep everything. I mean, I have multiple narratives, multiple races, multiple things happening, but both of those kinds of stories share the same thing, and that is the destination. You have to have a destination. So I know my destination beforehand, no matter what. But again, this comes down to personal preferences in terms of if you're a plotter or a pantser. I will say you should have, I'd recommend highly, we haven't talked about the importance of dialogue yet. I cannot overstate the use of dialogue to create tension.
Let's do it. Let's tackle that beast. Yeah. That's one thing, like a lot of people, I mean, they get really lost in descriptions and they need to know all these things about this and that and the other thing, but your characters talk too. So.
And your character should speak in a way that is, first of all, one of the things I tell people is use contractions. I mean, do you have that one weird friend who's like, I would like very much to go to the restaurant? Well, that's how it sounds if you use contractions and if you don't have distinct voices for your characters. Also, your characters being different should create tension automatically. I mean, even best friends yell at each other. So your tension, and you can build tension on a single page by starting a conversation at the top of the page. And I say, we going to get a pizza? Why? Because I'm hungry. I thought you ate yesterday. Yeah, I ate yesterday. Well, are we going to eat? Oh my God, fine. There, I've just built tension and given you a resolution in 10 seconds. And I can do that without a single dialogue tag.
We're mentioning pineapples.
Look, okay. Blocked, reported. No, I'm just kidding. I like everything except butter beans, so I'm okay with anything on pizza.
How do you use dialogue and action beats to build tension?
Okay, so you got to switch to the body. That's where you're going to switch to the body, and you're going to use the body and the objects around the body. Also, I like to. Everybody has their own trick. I think we overuse smirk. We overuse rolling eyes. Things like this.
I'm not allowed to gaze anymore. My characters can no longer gaze.
Did Ellen tell you that?
I used to gaze though in like 5 stories. So
yeah, it's perfect. We all have our tics, our verbal tics that translate to the page. But I think that you can shrug with one shoulder to show indifference. That's you can. Or I actually, the most ridiculous thing that I use, and it's one of my favorite characters. I have a 35-year-old woman named Tammy Sincotti who has pageant-ready makeup and hair and nails every day, and she's a UPS driver. And she likes 2 things: delivering on time and men. That's like her life. And what her signature is, she clicks her tongue and gives finger guns. And it's so. I have actually invested my readers to the point that when Tammy comes on the page, I don't have to have her say anything. They expect her to go like this.
Finger guns.
Yep, absolutely. And that is yes, it's technically verbal, but it's nonverbal in the sense that it's something that shows she's free and easy and comfortable in the moment, and she belongs there in that scene. And that's a way that I don't have to use. It's an action that imparts emotion and a state simultaneously. But it took me 5 books to develop it.
Oh, that's a long time. How does that help when you're trying to throw a character into the middle of a tense scene?
Okay, that contrast is great. Think about how good salted caramel.
So good.
Why?
Because it's salty and sweet.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a dress that has 2 pockets. In one pocket, I allow you to put whatever kind of snacks you want. In the other pocket, I can let you have what other kind of snacks you want. You put salty in one pocket and sweet in the other, and then you go and tell everybody that your dress has pockets because that's part of the rule. But also contrast. Contrast is interesting. So you can bring somebody who's very upbeat into a funeral procession, or you can bring somebody who's angry into a meeting next to the copying machine with an irritating guy named Kyle who is relentlessly happy. So contrast creates good scenes. Contrast creates tension.
Like Homer and Flanders, right? Flanders. Yeah, it's Flanders, right?
Who?
Sorry, I was thinking Simpsons. Homer and his buddy. No,
is it a book? I'm not familiar.
Have you never? Oh, you're fucking with me again. Damn it, Terry!
Again.
He keeps getting me all the time.
All right, Kronos says, best way to create tension, do something you'd not expect. Break away from the outline and make a character do something that the reader wouldn't expect, or add a plot point change that is unexpected. The child says in a video that when he doesn't know what happens next, the reader also won't do the unexpected.
Okay, that I agree. That's the wrench in the engine theory, where you throw a wrench into the engine and see what happens. I will say that actually I'm intimately familiar with Lee Child's books. My Basset Hound's name is Jack Reacher. And Jack Reacher is 10 years old. He was born October 24th, 10 years ago. So I've been reading Lee Child for a long time. I will say Lee Child has, he's a great example of somebody who knows his character intimately. So certain things about Jack Reacher. He's going to be vaguely amoral, although he's simultaneously extremely honorable. He's okay with breaking a guy's neck, but he's definitely going to take his wallet. So there are some responses, some pre-programmed responses. Now, where Lee Child succeeds is in my opinion, is he has a fantastic setting, and then Reacher's nature makes him, as a wanderer, he can constantly introduce unexpected things. It's like I have a witch series set in a little town. Carly's always in the same town, so I have to have things coming into the town. So for that, I have to use one of the 2 main plots. A stranger comes to town. It's not a hero's journey because Carly's not going anywhere. So it has to be a stranger comes to town every time.
See, but those are conscious decisions, which is something, like you were saying earlier, a lot of it can happen to be about, my God, if I could talk anymore, could be about what your genre is going to change the type of tropes, the type of tension you might be building, but also the type of story you're creating. Is it sedentary? Is it set in one area the whole time? That's going to change how you handle the building. I mean, are they moving across country? I mean, there's 1,000 things that could happen between 30 states. So yeah.
Yes. Once again, environment is character.
Yep.
And the environment should be unexpected. Once again, we're going back to the original comment at the beginning where you're reading from Reader's Digest, where it's pleasant. Well, pleasant stories are, there are pleasant books that sell well, but that's not what I write. I do need the unexpected. And you can predicate your entire novel on the unexpected. Like, who realistically thinks they're going to go out to the mail to get their mail and have a velociraptor attack you? We don't, but it's very interesting and it's unexpected. That's the kind of thing that you could write an entire novel around.
Do you think that readers will get likewise annoyed if completely unexpected, like the completely out of left field is coming? Or do you need to use those breadcrumbs in a subtle way to kind of lead them towards this dawning, like, oh no, this velociraptor is coming, or whatever it is? But
yes,
kind of dawn. How do you build that?
I think I agree with you completely. Only because the absurdity of something so jarring can kind of knock people out of the narrative. You can lose your readers that way. I'm not against it. I think you write whatever you want to write. but we are talking about commercial fiction. I mean, we're talking about making a living. I can fix that velociraptor problem by saying, Terry walked out onto the porch, put his slippers on to go get the mail, which was 60 yards away down the gravel road, and noticed a dead pigeon, oddly enough, torn in half. Huh. That's unusual. Oh, okay. You can give a small hint, an inkling, and that foreshadowing doesn't have to be big. It just has to be related. So if it's related to the jarring event, and you've set that, and also, hey, let's face it, a dead pigeon would be good tension.
Yeah, I'd be like, as a reader, you'd be like, "Oh, dude, Terry, don't go out there. You don't
absolutely,
want
absolutely
screwed up that pigeon."
And you could create further intention by me sitting there and sipping from my coffee cup and saying, maybe I won't go get the mail today. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get the mail. And you're going to, the entire time I'm walking down the gravel driveway to get the mail, you're going to say, don't do it. So.
And the crunch, crunch, crunch of the boot tramping across the gravel.
Yeah.
Now, in like the 1800s and 1700s, they used setting a lot and character description to build tension or to create a mood. Do we still do that in 2020? Is that still a thing?
I'll give you a great, that's a great. Have you ever read the story The Open Window by Ambrose Bierce?
I read other stories by him, but not that one. I read the one.
The Open Window is just, all it is about an open window in a cabin, and it's walking in and the people are missing. I mean, that's all it is. There is nothing. It is so tense, and it's so beautifully and elegantly constructed. To answer your question, I think that a lot of people could, but right now, because of the demands on our writing time, like I'm under pressure to myself. I first of all, I'm never going to get everything written that I want to, and I'm an impatient person by nature, so I want to write a lot. I don't have the luxury of waiting 2.5 years to create this nuanced. I can do the same. I don't want to say shorthand because that's both an archaic term and not applicable, but I can do it much more quickly by using a short, impact, heavy laden first 2 to 3 page chapter that really immerses you and gets you up and running. Most techno thrillers do that. That's a very common thing. Think about Jurassic Park and that type of story.
I'm reading it right now.
Absolutely. Sure. All of Michael Crichton's stories do that. All the techno thrillers tend to do that. It's always something happens in the first 2 or 3 pages, and you immediately, the first thing that happens afterwards is you change setting, and the story takes you away from there. So I respect that kind of craft, but I don't know that in the modern digital culture that we would engage with it as well.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people want to be dropped in really quickly.
So and medias res.
Yeah.
You like start absolutely.
You had like one sentence to convey like 4 different things about her. And it had to happen in that one sentence and then a tiny little chunk after, and invest all the readers. And that's kind of what we're up against now. It's like people want to be invested now because they get everything now. So they want it.
It's Tinder for readers is what it is. I mean, you really get a very brief window of opportunity to invest somebody because you're asking them for a significant amount of their time. They also, I owe it to them to give them the absolute best story that I can. And a great story doesn't start with a huge, 15-page warm up. It starts at the beginning. You start at the beginning of the story, drop them right into it.
Wow, I feel like we've just barely started on this topic.
It's like kind of like we did scratch and sniff. Almost there.
Good news is we are going to have Terry back on the show in 2 weeks, and talk about critical spacing. Actually, we're doing a variant sandwich. We're having Terry this week. Next week, we're having Jan Chaney and Molly Lerma together to talk about actually going public as an author and kind of dealing with your public and connecting with your readers. And then we're going to have Terry back. So variant sandwich. But before we close, we did have 2 questions from the audience ahead of time.
I'm ready.
One is by Joaquim Oliveira. He says, can a book suffer from having too much tension? Like the amazing TV show Lost. It suffered because the stakes, the tension got way too big for their own good. Is that a thing?
It was tension without resolution. Yes. He's right. Is it Joaquin?
Mm-hmm. Joaquin.
Correct. Yeah. You can only keep, this is battle readiness. Soldiers can only be battle ready for so long before the adrenaline overwhelms them and they lose their edge. And the same thing is absolutely true for readers. Past a certain point, I mean, at some point, the monster has to jump out of the shadows. You can't go 700 pages and expect the reader to come along with you. So Joaquin is absolutely right. You can have too much without a defined resolution.
And then as an author, how do you sense that? How do you figure it out? Or do you just need an editor to tell you?
Well, number one, you need an editor. But number two, if I get tired of writing something where nothing's happening, I know I've gone too far. It's very simple. If I say, do they really need to know what flavor Pop-Tart this is? Or should, so past a certain point, and I'm not advocating for everybody to write like Hemingway in a very spare, muscular prose. I'm advocating for you to write so that every word counts.
Yeah, I have to agree. All the short stories I've written, every freaking word counts in a short story.
Perfect.
And, I'm trying to take that into, the novel length where, I might have another 80,000, 90,000 words now, but each one of those need to count. Each scene has a purpose, which attaches to the next one, and something needs to be resolved and something else needs to build up. So, yeah.
I think it was W.B. Yeats who said, load every vein with your ore, meaning that you don't have throwaway lines. And if you consider your book as poetry, you don't have the option of having, I'm going to make sure that in every page that there is something critical to the conclusion. So if I'm talking about them making an omelet and using chopped scallions, the reason I mention those chopped scallions is to either give a distinct look at who the character is, like that's the cook and this is who they are, or because somebody's going to be murdered with scallions later on. There's a reason for putting it.
Poison, don't eat them, sir.
Are you doing that while you write and you're coming up with the words, or is that something where you get out the draft and then you're coming back in later and you're being like, oh, page 7 through 9 didn't have anything going on, I need to fix that?
I tend to write, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I tend to write a pretty clean first draft. I write a fully realized first draft. I might go back in and add, like, I'll say, I don't quite know that there was enough rotation here, or I might add some details here or there, but very little. Generally, in a 70 to 80,000 word manuscript, I will rarely add more than 1,500 words overall. It's actually more likely that I'll cut words. So to trim it down and get it lean and get it so that I don't want the pace to be breathless, but I want there to be a current where you're going with the current.
Okay, and then Walt asks, in a fast-paced world of instant gratification, should a plot seed pay off sooner rather than later, or do readers still have comprehension enough for the long game?
They still do, and I'm living proof. I'm living proof that I not only as a reader, because I absolutely will wait for a plot seed, but the other thing is you're not using a plot seed, you're using seeds. So you have the option when you use multiple plot seeds, you have the luxury of closing one of them out at the 20% mark, at the 38% mark, at 54%, at 70. So you can give, this is once again, tension and satisfaction and resolution. You can give them something. It's like, think of it as the buffet. The crab legs are at the end. What's at the beginning? The starches. But then there's something good, and then there's starches, and then there's something good, and then the crab legs are at the end. So
across the hall is all the chocolate.
Yes, where they roll you over in your chair. So, but yeah, I'm of the mindset that readers are a different cut of humanity right now in terms of how they think. People who love books are always going to love books. Books are never going away. And so therefore plot seeds are never going away because it's an integral part of the structure of a book.
Beautifully said, Terry. Oh my goodness, it has been so much fun having you on. I can't wait to see you week after next, because you're always fun to talk to.
Oh yeah, I thought we were going to be at an event. I was like, are we going to be at Chattanooga together? But
yeah, I mean, how be that, dude? Come on now, get on with it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'll see you guys. I'll see you in Las Vegas this year for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully, it doesn't sell out in 30 minutes like it did this year.
Maybe we could go as a team.
There we go.
Yeah. I just have solutions, people. That's just what I do.
All right. Can you tell our viewers, our listeners, places that they can find you, your work, all that good stuff?
Sure. Amazon, terrymaggert.com. I'm always on Twitter arguing, so you can come find me there. I retweet lots of pictures of space and cats and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm always Terry Maggert on social media, and I love interacting with people about books and stuff. So come find me there, and I'm always around.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, of course. All right. Thank you guys so much out there in the live audience. If you're listening on the audio right now, you should definitely be out here live and chatting in the chat, having all the shenanigans, getting your questions answered live. Why not? Why wouldn't you? I don't know why you wouldn't. And also, a little bit earlier, I had asked the team who else was a January baby, because there is Lauren, there is Ralph, there is also me. We are all January babies, and we are this close to 1,000 subscribers. We are 200 and a little bit away from 1,000 subscribers. Also that thing. I want to see by the end of January 1,000 subscribers for the Keystroke Medium January babies. I think that would be awesome. Also, we have the Keystroke Medium sticker, totally on purpose and completely. I just forgot the word.
We gotta pick someone.
No, there's a word. There's a word.
Spontaneous?
Spontaneous?
Random? No, spontaneous. It's where we're purposely doing it.
Intentional?
I'll probably think of it after.
Integral?
No. You say it every time, and I forgot what it is. I totally ruined it. All the tension's gone.
Yeah, that was.
Terry, can you pick someone at random?
Walt.
Walt.
Yeah, who asked the question?
You got a sticker already.
Oh, well, you can't do Walt, Shadow, or Bill Frisbee.
Hakeem.
Okay, hold on. I'm ready. Philip Booker.
Philip Booker. Oh, he's a fellow January baby. All right now. Yeah. Yay, Philip.
Yes.
You need to message Lauren over here, and she will get your very special Keystroke Medium sticker to you.
Excellent.
All right. So, can't wait to see her. Okay, let me start over. I don't know. We'll see you guys next week, where we're going to talk about more reading, writing, and everything in between. Do not forget to hit the subscribe button. Do not forget to hit the bell. We want 1,000 subscribers before the end of January. Check you out next week. Good night, you guys.
Bye.